Want to achieve network marketing success? Then you're in the right company. Hello, and welcome to Leave Nothing to Chance, hosted by networking marketing giant John Solleder. Learn everything you need to know about the network marketing space from somebody who's actually done it. Join us every week for front row seats as we feature some of the finest and most successful personalities in network marketing. Leave nothing to chance. Join us now.
Hey, this is going to be a lot of fun tonight, my friends. I am going to interview somebody who I have known literally almost your entire life, Mr. Jordan Matthews out in California. And how are you tonight, Jordan?
Doing great, John. Thanks for having me. And yeah, we were just talking a minute ago. I said I remember you throwing me on my mother's bed when I was like 4 years old. So it's kind of interesting how life unfolds. So yeah, it's good to connect.
And I remember back then too, your mom and I were working together, and I came to Pittsburgh on a regular basis. And one day I said to your mom, I said, has Jordy been to a baseball game yet? She's like, no. I go, well, we're going to the Pirates game tonight.
Yeah.
And we did. We went to the Pirates game tonight. And I think we ate ice cream and all sorts of stuff, right? We had a lot of fun that night.
Yeah. I wish I could say I remembered every detail, though. That was probably like
you were a little young. You were a little young. It was probably more fun for me than it was.
I think it was, but
for you, you know.
But you're painting the picture for me of what every detail I should remember. But it was funny because I remember you coming in. I remember you coming in for like I think a judo competition,
yep.
And I remember driving over to this area where you had that because you were big into judo and powerlifting and all that stuff. So it's amazing how time flies because obviously I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old now, so it's interesting.
That was it's ironic that you say that because of course we're going to talk about your life quite a bit tonight, and one of the parallels that we have. My dad had died on the Saturday morning before that tournament, and it was the national tournament. And I had trained and I was ready to compete and have my fights. And I knew my dad was dying, but unfortunately passed away that Saturday. We buried him on a Tuesday.
Yep.
And I had to weigh in on Thursday. Mm-hmm. And I was going to stay at your mom's house, and she was nice enough to invite me. My dad just died. I go through all this stuff, and it's like, do I even go? And I said to myself, you know what my father would say? The show must go on. Like you trained, you're ready, get your butt on the plane and go. And I did. And I did. I think I got the medals here somewhere. I don't know in this messy office of mine, but I competed. I know I medaled in both the divisions that I fought in that weekend, you know, so all those years ago, but that was 1992. So I was younger than you are right now, I think, just about. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, life does go by. But hey, Jordan, you've had an amazing career, though, man. I mean, I am like so. I just stand back sometimes and I watch what you're doing with your life and your family, but your business career is overwhelming. What you've been doing the last few years. So let me tell people a little bit about you, and I'm gonna read a little bit. Jordan, as we said earlier, he's a business trial lawyer. He's a litigator. He deals a tremendous amount in the entertainment industry as well as in the business community. He serves currently as the lead counsel on multiple matters throughout the country. He's actively litigating matters in California, Nevada, Massachusetts. He handles matters in federal and state court, and also experiences handling administrative proceedings with the California Labor Commission. He's argued before the Ninth Circuit Court of the U.S. Court of Appeals. He's involved in litigations covered by the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, CNN, CNNBC, the New York Times, amongst other publications. He's been involved with some tremendously large and successful cases, I'll say, as well, that I was reading about the other day. He's a graduate of Pepperdine University in California. I have a good friend, John Molson, in Montreal, who's a Pepperdine grad as well. Family owns the Montreal Canadiens, and his son's the kicker with the Green Bay Packers now. So Pepperdine's produced some pretty good graduates, needless to say. But Jordan has been involved in commercial litigation trials, quite a bit in the entertainment world. I know you were involved in a major case that you may or may not be able to say a whole lot about in the resort industry, involving the Wynn Resort Company and Casino, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And believe me, when I say he is just getting started, He's only in his 30s and he's already done a tremendous amount. And you were in a movie a number of years ago as an actor. I remember that. I've got a copy of it, and just doing all sorts of things. So, Jordan, welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to connect. Good to see you face to face, and it's been a while, but thanks for having me.
Well, and you know, you've got a book coming out very shortly. When you have nothing, you have everything. It's a compelling title. Let's talk about it.
Yep. So it's called Failure When You Have Nothing, You Have Everything. It is, there's some central themes there. Obviously, you talked about the loss of your father. I think the basic thing is that in life, I have found that there's almost this propaganda around success. People have this idea that if you're successful, either it's some sort of luck, or I actually really dislike that term, luck, or I don't know what the expectation may be that comes with it. But my experience has been that I have experienced, and we all have things, but I've experienced failure and crushing defeat to the point of near bankruptcy, moving out of homes, turning in cars, obviously death of family members, losing businesses, lawsuits at a very, very high level. And I was, by the time I was about 27, I put together about $600 million in financing deals in the entertainment space. And this was after I raised several $1,000,000 to raise a film in the middle of the financial crisis. And that imploded, and I was in litigation because a Russian distributor who pirated, they created a piracy of the movie. It led to litigation. And then after, it's a much larger story, but basically, I put together all of these incredible deals. I had about $4.5 million that I put together in terms of debt that I had leveraged, personal guarantees. And I was doing deals with, CEOs of public studios, and, all the NDAs were signed. And these are all, they're public companies, some private companies. And then I got stuck in my business partner's divorce. And that turned into a huge mess publicly. There was a lot that went on, and I had a family at the time. I had a wife. I had my daughter had just been born, and I had to reset and restart and go to law school, and a lot of things unfolded from there. So the point is that, I don't necessarily know where you want to go with it, but
let me stop here for a second.
Sure.
Let's go through some of these things kind of point by point, because failure teaches us so much about life, right? It's easy when everything's going well in life to just kind of coast, right? It's when we fail that we gotta step back and analyze what happened. So starting out, you're a young guy. You're, I think, 18 or 19. You go off to college, and your dad passes away 3 weeks after. Do I have that right?
Yeah, about 2.5, 3 weeks. I left. I was at Ohio State at the time, and they're kind of on a quarter system. They start a little bit later. So I think I left for college either around like September 21st or 22nd of 2003. And he passed away on October 9th of 2003.
And he was a young guy. I knew your dad a little bit, met him a couple of times. That had to be not only earth-shaking for you, but it also had to be one of those compelling moments in your life where you said, okay, what am I going to do with my life now? Right? What am I going to do? Watch my dad's life, watch my mom's life. What am I going to do now? My dad's gone. That support system's gone. You're a young guy. You're just starting your education. And one of the two most important people at that point in your life is gone. How did you work through that?
Well, I mean, it took years, but honestly, it was the lead up. So I tell this story. This is, there's some layers here. So I'll start with one story, right? It's a pretty traumatic story, but there was so much gold that came out of it. I found that a lot of pain, and being able to handle pain and pressure is something that I think is necessary in order to have success. And I don't just mean success from a perspective of money, but just meaning and actually living a very full life. So I remember when I was about 17, he was going through a second divorce from my stepmother at the time, and they had a very tumultuous situation. She, she was claiming that he was hitting her, which I don't know the evidence of that. I knew his character. I didn't think that actually occurred, but I wasn't there. But so she, called the police on him and threw him in jail. This happened a couple times. And so they were kind of going through a separation divorce or so. And his birthday was December 23rd of the year. And so he was relapsing at the time because he was an alcoholic. Great guy, very good soul, but he couldn't really control that. And he was the type of person he was more introverted. I think his mind was very complex. I think he thought a lot, and but he also had a switch that just couldn't turn off. And I read a book about that after he passed away called The Craving Brain, I think it is, that explained it from a chemical perspective a little bit better. But he was supposed to go to rehab. And of course, like any, good addict or whatever, he talked his way out of it. He was supposed to go someplace where he was going to be inpatient for weeks. Then I had found out that he was going to be, going to a place that was closer, maybe inpatient or outpatient or whatever. But nevertheless, that didn't occur. And he basically talked his way into staying at my stepmother's house over the holidays. And of course, she left to go visit her family. So on his birthday, I remember calling him earlier that day. And I said I was going to stop by and drop him off a present. My mother at the time would often go get a gift, for him, for me. And it was like a nice sweater. She knew what he liked and all that stuff. And so I called him earlier. I told him I was going to stop by, and we lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So it's December. It's cold. It gets darker earlier. And so maybe around like a little after 5, I go and I drive over to his house. And as I pull up, he lived in like a Midwestern duplex. So it was like, my mother had done really well at that point. And she, after watching her really struggle and fight for 14 years, she bought the home of her dreams. And he was living fine, but it was, just normal sort of middle class setting. So Midwestern duplex is kind of like a house that's split in two. So I drive over, and it's like three levels. And I drive over, and as I pull up, I call him, and he does not pick up. But I see that the front door is ajar, and I see that there's a light on the second floor. And I call him again, and he's not picking up. And I just had a bad feeling, and I decided I'm not going in. So I left. At the time, earlier in my life, I had been a valedictorian. I was working my butt off. I was really miserable, but I, worked really hard. And then with what I was experiencing with him, I was going off in a different direction, and I was associating with people who were not probably the best people. And so I go to my friend's house, and which is like 5 minutes away. I'm there for 10 minutes, and my phone rings, and it's him. It's my dad. So he sounds very groggy, like he just woke up. And my friend doesn't know. No one really knew. My friends didn't know what was going on. I had, I took him to detox. My after school activity was very different than sort of what a lot of my other friends were going through or experiencing with going to practice and not just going to dinner with their family and whatever. And so I said to my dad, I said, do you want me to come back? I just stopped by. I didn't, I didn't come in, but I called. And so he said, yeah. So I said, okay, I just got my stuff, and I got in my car. I drove over. 5 minutes later, I'm at his house, and I pull up, and he is outside. He's standing. There's like cement steps and all that stuff, but he's standing at the door. It's dark. He's standing in a bathrobe smoking a cigarette. And get out of my car. And at that time, I think I had almost developed a bit of like a sociopathic coldness, where I was becoming very used to trauma, and so it was a bit of a defense mechanism. And anyways, I get out of my car, I pop the trunk, get the present out, and I start walking up the stairs. There's like 15 stairs, cement stairs. There's this lawn, this little hill, and I walk up, get to the top of that, and then there's about 4 or 5 stairs to go to the porch. And I walk up, and right as I get to the porch, he steps into the light, and I look at him, and he is covered head to toe in blood. And I look at him, and I'm like, what? I'm thinking, what happened to you? And my first thought is, I'm like, who the hell beat the hell out of you in jail? And then I, split second thought, I'm like, okay, well, they would never release him like that. And he just looks at me very deadpan, like, what, right?
Mm.
And he seems oblivious to it. He starts walking into the house, and he's kind of sauntering from left to right and, off balance. And he goes and he sits down in the chair, and I sit down on a couch across from him. And I look at him. I was almost becoming a bit of the father in that experience, and growing up very quickly with those experiences. We all have our own different traumas and experiences. I said to him, you've been drinking. And he said, no. So I said, okay. And obviously I knew the answer. So I got up and I started walking around the house, and quite frankly, it looked like a murder scene. There was blood everywhere throughout the house, because he had a scalp wound. So you had your scalp wound, you bleed a lot.
Mm.
And he was drinking probably about like a liter of hard alcohol a day, and he would just pass out. And so obviously he must have, I assume he probably drank what he drank and probably fell down the stairs and cracked his head open or something like that. There's blood all over the kitchen. I go upstairs, there's blood all over the carpet, all this other stuff. And then I have this realization, thankfully, that I'm like, oh, I can't touch him, because when I was 6 months of age and my parents divorced, he was, he got drunk, and he left on a motorcycle, and an hour later he was life flighted in, and he got hit by a car, and they did a blood transfusion. In those days, they didn't screen the same way, and he caught hepatitis C. And so I all of a sudden realized, I'm like, I can't touch you. And I'm going through the house to try to find gloves, and I can't find them. So I look at him and I say, look, I'm going to go to my mother's house. I'm going to go get gloves. I will be right back. Do not close the door. So I leave. I go to my mother's house, 5-10 minutes away, max 5 minutes away. I walk in. She's on the phone. She's doing business. She's a single mother. She's doing whatever she has to do as a business owner, successful entrepreneur, and mother, single mother. At that time, I had gotten really good at just like containing whatever I had to deal with. And so she wasn't really any the wiser at the time. I walk in, I go into the kitchen, I go under the sink, I get these pair of yellow gloves, and I walk out of the house, and I leave, and I go back to my dad's house. And 5 minutes later, I get there and I look up, and the door's closed. He locked me out. And my thought, at that point, it's like, well, I don't know what's happened to you. And so there was a lot of experiences like that. But there was another much bigger experience that he gave me that was very profound. This is a kind of a continuation, if you kind of want to go into it, but a couple weeks, a couple months, I'm not sure the exact date, before I left for college, I was sitting in his house. I think he may have been detoxing. I don't know what was going on specifically. I'd go into his house, and there'd be, he had switched from hard alcohol to beer, and I'd go in, there'd be bags, just garbage bags full of beer cans, just buying cases of beer, just drinking all day, wasn't showering, all that stuff. And so I was sitting there, and I remember he asked me, he said, what do you want to do? And he didn't ask me in any judgmental way. It was not like, what do you want to do with your life? I have some sort of expectation or whatever. It was more like, what do you want to do? I think he actually in some way knew that I had whatever potential he felt that I had, but maybe I was distracted with all of this stuff. And I was going to Ohio State, which is, it's good school. It was fine. But, if you had asked anyone probably 2 or 3 years earlier where I was going to go, they'd be like, oh, he's going to go to Harvard or something like that. And my grades had fallen because of what I was dealing with. And thank God I didn't go to Harvard. I would have been miserable. But so I responded to him, and I said, I've said I was thinking of like owning a magazine company. I was kind of entrepreneurial, and I was thinking, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but that's what came to mind. And then, he kind of had this pause, like he was just kind of taking that in. And then a couple of weeks later, we have this other conversation, and he tells me, look, when you go to college, your life is going to change. You're going to make new friends, you're going to get in relationships and all that stuff. And at that point, everyone, honestly, aside from my mother and my father's older sister, largely had deserted him in life, and myself. And I was really taking care of him day to day. His older sister lived in New York. My mother, was around, but I was really becoming more of a caretaker. And loyalty is a very big thing for me. Integrity and loyalty is a big thing for me. I believe that you show up when no one else will. That's just my, that's what you do. A lot of that was reinforced from my mother. That's just, her character and whatnot. So I said, no. I said, I will call you every day. I will come back every weekend. And of course, I left for college. I remember vividly the day I left for college. I had a very tough experience with him. But I left for college. I called him as much as I could. Sometimes it went to voicemail. Sometimes I got him. And within about 2.5 weeks later, I get a call in my dorm room, and it's my mother, my suite mate, sort of like my roommate. We had a couple people there. Picks up the phone, and I can tell that he's talking to her, but he will not give me the phone. I knew what it was, so I said, "Give me the phone," and I took it. And my mother's on the other line. She was, she's crying, and I just coldly said, "I said, is he gone?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, just come pick me up." And so I left, went home that weekend, buried him, cried my eyes out, came back. I was very I gained like 35, 40 pounds in like 6 weeks. So I was, started going through that process, spent about 2 years. But at that time it was a triggering moment. It was a major trigger, because at that point I was kind of going through the motions. I was like, okay, I'm going to go major in business. I'm going to do, whatever, major marketing. I'm going to do whatever. And then all of a sudden I just said, my family had been pushing me to go pursue a career as an actor because of some prior experience I had in going to New York. And I was moving away from that. And then I just had that loss put me in a place of, I didn't understand it at the time, but I felt like, just go. Like, what do I have to lose? Like, I just go. Like, this is not working. I'm done with this. I'm leaving. And so it took about 2 years, because I was trying to like transfer and all that stuff to NYU. And I ended up going to this place called the Stella Adler Conservatory. So it took 2 years. I moved to New York. I was about 20, turning 21 at the time. And spent a year there, very crazy year. Moved out to LA in 2006. And the whole point of that is, within about, a year and a half, I met a girl, went through a bad relationship, or it was a good relationship, but I went through a bad breakup. And I developed this whole marketing campaign, building a career as an actor. I meet this producer who had a project that didn't have any money. And I got really sick of being attached to projects that were never going to go. And everyone kept telling me, oh, well, we're going to shoot this and whatever. But everyone's just really full of a lot of crap. And I started to realize a lot of these people just didn't have any money. And I said, I can figure this out. And so the beginning of how that happened was absolutely crazy. I decided I was going to raise the capital. It was in the middle of the financial crisis of 2008, where the stock market's collapsing, real estate is collapsing, end up raising the money and get on margining bond accounts, getting margin calls, personal guarantees, maxing everything out, maxing out my credit, all this stuff. But the point of that was, I ended up going into this yoga class, and I was doing a lot of meditation, really to try to stay in shape, but also it was like a way to kind of reset myself in the middle of a tremendous amount of chaos. Every day was a bomb going off. And I remember doing this meditation, it's just like what they call vinyasa yoga. And I'm spiritual, but I'm not a very like floaty person. I'm very scientific, or I look at things logically, but I understand the layers of things. And I finished this class, and at the very end, if anyone who kind of understands how yoga works, they have this thing called shavasana at the end, and you're laying there, and you're kind of, the meaning of it is like, you've done the work, now you have to learn how to receive. Like, we have a very Western culture. In Western culture, it's like, you push and you push and you push. You don't know when to actually recharge yourself. And so this is kind of that Eastern philosophy melted in to it. And so I'm laying there, and they have this sort of gong meditation going on, and I'm sweating, and I'm just tired, and kind of gotten the fight out of me for a moment, perhaps. And I'm just resting and breathing, and it's dark. My eyes are closed, and I start to see these little dots, these little white specks. And as I'm really conscious and present, these little specks and dots start to look like stars, like I'm in space, and I'm just seeing, stars around me. And all of a sudden, I start to see the outline of my father's face. This is probably like 5 or 6 years after he passed. And it was vivid, and I could feel this really weird, interesting, raw experience of whatever that was. And I cracked, and I broke down in tears and just sort of went through that. And a couple weeks later, I have the same experience. I'm at the end of a class, I'm laying there, and I am, it's dark, and I have the same vivid imagery, and it takes time to kind of get there, but I'm very just conscious and aware of what's going on around me. And I have that experience. Again, I cry, I break down the tears. And I had this epiphany at that time. And I looked at everything that was going on around me in terms of business, in terms of what I was doing, but it wasn't just business. It was like, I was going to go after whatever the hell I wanted to do. And I was going to do it. Fail, success, whatever was going to happen. It doesn't matter. The success was going out and doing it, and not saying what if.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to the 2 conversations he had with me. What do you want to do? And when you leave, your life is going to change. And I responded, and I told him no. And of course I left, and then he passed away. And the epiphany and realization I had at that time was, at least on some level, obviously there are different layers to it, but what I felt was that he let go to let me live my life. And it was at that point that I legitimately lost fear of anything. I lost fear of death. I lost fear of losing any relationship around me. I lost fear of losing businesses, bankruptcy, losing money, embarrassment, whatever, anything. And I actually started to get into a place where every day was a constant exercise in making sure that I would do something that I was very uncomfortable with, and actualizing it and making it happen and doing it. And so it was an incredible gift. It was a very painful experience that took years of therapy to get through, and working on myself and figuring that out. But it also put me in a situation where, everyone experiences death. Everyone experiences, trauma. There were a lot of very extreme things that happened with that. And I jumped into even more extreme experiences in business and personally and whatnot. But the feeling is that I knew that if I walked into a room, I had my physiology had experienced what I needed to experience to own that room, in a humble way, meaning like, what are you going to do? You're going to reject me? You're going to say no to me? You're going to throw me out of a company? You're going to, the deal's going to implode, or whatever. Okay, fine. I'll rebuild it. I'll do whatever I have to do, because I knew that at that point I could take it. I could take a hit.
So let's talk about some of those hits. You had an experience that you're raising $600 million. I can't even get my head around that number, dealing with that level of number, but $600 million in financing. And while this is all going down, your partner goes through kind of an unexpected divorce. Your daughter's born, and meantime, you got to be focused on raising $600 million. Tell me, what you can,
Sure.
Tell me about that deal.
Well, so what it really preceded, it was a failing forward thing that really the initial film deal prior to that, kind of backed into that. What happened was at the time in 2008, when I was having this experience, I met this director. He wanted to help raise the financing. And at that point, I wanted to be, an actor, and I needed to get my career going. And I was in my early 20s, and I'm like, I gotta get going. So if it's not going to happen now, it's not going to happen ever. And he was a visual effects sort of expert, and visual effects are the most expensive thing really to do in film production, because it's really the post-production. If you go and see a big, what they call tentpole movies, Spider-Man or X-Men or Avatar or whatever, it's really the visual effects that's the most expensive piece of that film. And so he had worked at Sony and Warner Brothers, and he had worked on movies like 300 and a lot of other projects. And so he had his own project, and he was going to be able to make it. It was still going to be expensive. It was still going to be millions. It was still, or there was, there was a lot of money that would be raised in connection with it, and setting up a production company and all these other things. But he could do it for less money. And so he had told me at the time, there was a guy named Thomas Ian Nicholas from American Pie who was attached to the film. And he told me, he's like, look, if we can't do this project, I'm going to essentially defect and do this other project with Tom, but I'm going to spend about 22 months in post-production. I'm like, all right, well, that's 2 years. Like, I got to get going now. So I told him I had a lawyer friend draft an MOU, memorandum of understanding, that I was going to come up with the financing in about 90 days for this project. No idea how I was going to do this, or I was going to defect and do a lower budgeted film. And it was kind of off we went at that point. I ended up, I maxed out my credit to start putting the money together. He at the time ended up engaging an attorney named Matt Galser, who represents James Cameron and Tom Cruise. And at the time, Cameron had Avatar coming out. And so he had a lot of, leverage in our negotiations. I talked to this guy, I think I found online, about buying a Nevada Shelf Corp and getting a DBA here in California. And that turned into an absolute mess in terms of what he was basically almost advising me to engage in fraud, was setting up all these bank accounts and trying to get loans based off cash flow and all this stuff. And obviously I didn't go to get the loans. I just felt like, I was like, okay, this is obviously not going to be the way that this is going to work. And so part of this was, through some family relationships and whatnot, ended up getting involved in an oil deal where about $100,000 was initially put into this oil deal. I was supposed to net several $1 million that were going to be used. And it was with the Bolivian oil ministry. This is all in 2008. And we were passive investors, and that deal blew up. I remember getting all the news because there was stuff in the Wall Street Journal coming out. And basically, I think some guy had in Bolivia was, these guys were, it's a pretty corrupt place, delivered about $500,000 in a briefcase to some guy and got shot and killed. And all these guys were getting indicted, and the entire deal blew up. And the people we were working with moved this deal over to a deal in Saudi Arabia. And so the oil was lifted onto the ship called the Greenpoint, and the oil was going to be sold to ConocoPhillips in Houston. It comes in the port of Houston. And I remember it being all over like sort of the news networks at that time, but the ship got pirated by Somali pirates, and they paid the ransom off. But then it went to Houston to be sold to ConocoPhillips, and Hurricane Ike hit, blew up the entire port of Houston, and the entire deal went south. And at that time, I put about $30,000 that I put together into lawyers, negotiating operating agreements, setting up a production company, negotiating director agreements, employee crew deal memos, and all of this stuff. And I had no idea how I was the whole deal imploded. And I'm sitting there negotiating, and I'm committing myself to a lot of money. And, I'm working through investor relationships, and end up doing basically mortgages to real estate and margining a bond account, raise all the money, put it in the bank. And of course, stock sell-offs, stock market's collapsing, real estate market is dropping out. And so we go into production, and I was starring in the film, and no one knew that I was behind the scenes or doing any of that stuff. No one was supposed to know, because, it's just sort of the imagery of that's sort of what I'm talking about, the propaganda of things. Everyone just sort of had this expectation. Oh, you're an actor. You must walk into a room and people just must be, amazed by you and want to put you in a thing. Yeah. I mean, I understand that, but that's not how it works, because it's a risky business. So it's really a name thing. It's a branding thing, because people do things that are comfortable to them. So they go see a Tom Cruise movie because they know Tom Cruise. They go to McDonald's because they're used to going to McDonald's. And so, that's sort of how the industry works. And I remember even being on set one day and getting a margin call, and we had to basically come up with $75,000 in 24 hours to pay off the margin, because you can only have an 80% margin against the value of the bond account, and bonds were dropping in value for the first time since the Great Depression. So, we had a bunch of messes like that. And I'll sort of fast forward, but we built this huge campaign, sold it to a bunch of international territories, because you license it to international territories. And we had this woman, Nadine DeBarros, who was selling domestic rights. And Nadine was at a company called Voltage, and they were behind a movie called The Hurt Locker that was coming out and also going for the Academy Awards. And so between her and between, Matt representing Cameron, and a lot of the other sort of, mechanisms that we had in play, we had built a tremendous amount of hype. We were leveraging it off of the success of Twilight and the way it was marketed, and we were getting a lot of hype around it. But we had a screening at the Directors Guild, and Nadine flew to Italy to save some other film. The screening got kind of messed up, and we moved over to Stony. I had put about 3 years of my life into this. I had driven myself to the point of near insanity in terms of putting everything of my life. Everything was maxed. It was a huge bet. And I remember going to the screening over at Sony, and I watched it, and I saw the credits, saw my name, my face, all that stuff, and everything like that. But I watched it, and I'd seen all the promotional things that were put together, but it wasn't a good film, and it wasn't what I had expected. And we knew that it wasn't going to be a good film, like it wasn't going to be an Academy Award film. And obviously I was containing a lot of stuff shooting it in terms of what happened. Wasn't in the best mindset or mind frame. But we knew that it wasn't about that. It was really about, the marketing of it and all this stuff. But anyways, we had deals that would be like 150 grand on a territory that would go down to like 10, or it would be rescinded. And so all of a sudden I was in a situation where instead of getting this huge, what they call a P&A commitment, a prints and advertising commitment from the studio, we were going to, basically I had to leverage and raise more capital to do what's called a theatrical 4-wall release in New York and LA, to release it theatrically and leverage that into a deal. And I leveraged that into a deal with Lionsgate. And so we were able to put that together, and we got a deal through Lionsgate and all that stuff. But then, and this is sort of, this is the constant failing forward. I mean, the film had bombed. I went from feeling like I was going to be on the cover of GQ and whatever, and every major agency was going to call me, to all of a sudden, I remember getting lost on the way home. I couldn't remember how to get home. And I came home that night eventually, and I collapsed on my bed, and I just passed out. I passed out to the point of like the pain was so suffocating, because I realized I was on the verge of losing everything. And everything I had in good faith worked for was about to collapse, and it was collapsing. And I kept like waking up in and out of like waking up and going back to sleep and all that stuff. And this happened for a couple of days until, no one was calling me, and I realized I got to move. I have to move. And so I started harassing my business manager, who's like an accountant, for weeks, until he basically told me that there was a client. I think he told me this because he just wanted me to stop calling him. Like there was this former client of his who was an executive, and he was partnered with the Baldwins, and he was partnered with Tracy Edmonds' company, who used to be, she was married to Eddie Murphy, and she had a production company, and he was looking for talent. At that time, people still thought I was really much more the actor. But basically, so I have a meeting with him where I basically am still told, just present yourself as the actor, which meant if I walked into a room, I wasn't going to be myself, because I knew all of the other stuff. I was doing all the deals. I was negotiating the distribution agreements, the acquisition agreements. I was dealing with litigation. I was sending out demand letters with lawyers, because distributors aren't paying and the sales agents aren't paying. All of this stuff, running the company, running the business, and dealing with vendors who are trying to overcharge. And I had this horrible meeting with him, because I'm pretending, they just found me. Hey, I want to be this guy, whatever. And so I met him over at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, and it was just this really bad meeting. I remember giving him a look though, and I think he could tell in my eye. It was just like, don't mess with me. Like there's something more here or whatever. I shot him an email like a day later, and I said, hey, I have this other company that I set up it was called 9 Everest Entertainment LLC. And I called it 9 Everest because it was 9 for 9 lives Everest, Mount Everest. So 9 lives Mount Everest. And I told him I set up that company. I'd optioned another film, and we were working on producing a music video with this band Helmet that was kind of similar to the 9 Inch Nails. They had done the video and the soundtrack for The Crow. And that we had just done an output deal with some, distributor. And he obviously got the message that I knew a lot more. I kind of hinted that I knew a little bit more than he expected, but I went through a lot with him. It took 4 months of meetings, him setting meetings, and then him ghosting me at meetings and saying, I'm flying to New York, meeting with the NFL on whatever, all this other stuff. And then I'd keep going after, he had me working with this guy who was a New York Italian guy. He had this guy, basically his consigliere, he was another therapist. that I went to because I gave him this look and he realized there was something more to it. And so I was being told to pretend to be someone I was not. And so I ended up working with this guy until I really kind of came forward with what I was doing. And he's like, you're a mogul. You're not this, actor. You could run a studio, you could run a public company, or all this other stuff. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to be. I was 26, 27, 20. I was 26 at the time. And I was dealing with the problem of I would go into rooms and people would think, that I was just too big for the room. And I didn't care because the way I was brought up from my mother was like, I don't care what people think. But there was an immense level of pressure getting thrown at me all the time and constant rejection and all this other stuff. But I ended up forming a partnership with him. This guy, his name is Alex DeAndrea. And then sort of what happened was this film that I'd done all the theatrical 4-wall release, leveraged a deal with the studio. I think it was April 9th or April 10th. I think it was April 9th of 2010 on IMDb, where they do the message boards for films. They used to have a message board where people could comment. And so I saw this comment about R5 and I had no idea what this thing was. This guy, by the way, at this time, the guy I was going to partner with had me going back to acting classes. I thought I was going to be the biggest thing in the world. And all of a sudden I'm sitting in an acting class with everyone who I had felt, they're nice people, that it was just, I went back to being in a very bottom place, just crushed, boom, just smack, right? And what am I going to do? Am I going to just sit there or just keep moving? And it was a suffocating level of defeat, but there was a pressing feeling in my heart, in my body at that time. I cannot sit down. I just couldn't sit down. I just refused to sit down. And then, so I get this message. I see this thing about R5. I had no idea what it was. I call my partner, my business partner, and leave him a message because I don't get a hold of him. And I tell him about this thing. And an hour later, I get frantic calls. Cease and desist letters are going out everywhere. And basically R5 is for Region 5. It's Russia. It's the Baltic states. And at that point, the first release of the film was supposed to be May 30th or May 31st of 2010, I think it was, through Lionsgate UK. It was going to be released in the UK first. And our international sales agent had done a deal with this Russian company where they had a holdback clause. Holdback clause at that point, before streaming and all that stuff, if they had a first release in the US, you couldn't release the movie until 6 months later, because it was basically just scheduling how a film would be released in different territories. And so you send a master copy to a lab when you're doing what's called QC checks or quality checks and deliverables. And perhaps because of the hype around it, someone took a copy, ripped it, and put it on the internet and pirated the movie all over the world 7 weeks before the movie. Destroyed the entire release. And so I see the numbers start skyrocketing on IMDb. It shoots above Avatar. It shoots above Twilight. It shoots above Passion of the Christ. I remember taking screenshots of all this stuff. We had #1 trailer on iTunes and popularity and all this other stuff. And I'm getting $0 from this because it's just being stolen left and right. And I, fortunately, through this new relationship that I've been, my new business partner, he had good relationships. And so he introduced me to a guy who, was a major power hitter at a firm called Laveley and Singer, which is basically the preeminent entertainment litigation firm in the world. And this guy named Michael Holtz, who's one of my closest friends today. And so he became my lawyer. And, we filed a notice of arbitration because we had an arbitration provision. I spent about a year just getting it to a point of mediating. And he told me, like a good lawyer, he's like, look, this is a Russian company. You're going to spend about $200,000 litigating this for the next 2 years. And then even if you get a judgment, they're either going to transfer the money to Russia or they're going to BK. Good luck collecting. And so I remember going to a mediator's proposal. I had $6 million in damages that I put together. And I said I was willing to accept $1 million, right, to walk. They wanted to hand me back the rights to the film. That was their offer. And of course, they walked out of the mediation, after I spent, $5,000 on my lawyer and mediator for the day, and all that stuff. And I flew to New York a couple of weeks later. And I was, at that time, I'm trying to get money in from all the sales to keep my new business going, because I form a partnership with this new guy and we have a meeting around the same time the theatrical release is coming out, and it was like in June or July of the time, we go to this red carpet event, and we have Sushi, at the time, and he is like, he's like, I want to put together a $25 million film fund, and I said, well, let's do 50. I wanted to do larger projects, and so he was close with this guy named Scott Brink, who's a partner at a firm called Jeffer Mangels, and Scott was partnered with Dan Grigsby. Dan is Kevin Costner's attorney, and Kevin, he does a lot. He, really takes more of a controlling position with his projects, and producing them and financing and raising the money and all that stuff. So he knew the ins and outs of it. So that was really the basis of it. I took a settlement in that first project because I was putting together a $50 million raise at the time and working with investors and flying and, meeting with billionaires and all of this stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to take a settlement because I'll close out the losses with raising this 50. And then that turned into, there were two major companies at the time that were heavy hitters. There was a company called Legendary Entertainment, which was behind the movie The Hangovers and the relaunch of the Batman franchise that was very successful. They put together about $500 million, about $500 million initially, to do slate financing deals with Warner Brothers, where they would co-finance about half the budget, 25% to 50% of a production budget. And then the other company was a company called Relativity Media. And Relativity had started by, they formed these funds called Gun Hill, I think it was Gun Hill Road or something like that. There was two different entities that were largely started. Ryan Kavanaugh had started Relativity, and he started, actually, what he did in 2005, he raised about $500 million through Wall Street so that Marvel could start producing their own content, because before they only had deals with Sony. They would basically license out X-Men or Spider-Man to Sony or Fox, and that's how they did the movies. So their first major hit, obviously, was Iron Man. And so Ryan had put the money together for that. And I said to my agent at the time, I said, that's what I want to do. I want a studio. And so I wanted to put together, the slate financing initially to get access to the larger films, the tentpole movie releases, the big blockbusters. And so that's not an easy task. Setting those meetings was very questionable because we had smaller productions, where we were going to put $5 million into a project or $1 million into a project or whatever. And I had projects with Dan Myrick, who directed Blair Witch. I had a deal over at Mandalay, Peter Guber's company. Peter Guber owns the Golden State Warriors. So I had these minor deals that were being put together because I was constantly, using my network and using these relationships to put this together. But it unfolded into a much bigger deal. Unfortunately, at that time, my partner, there's so much more there. But, Alex was in litigation separately, which I knew about, but I didn't know the full details. And his wife was a soap actress, soap star on The Bold and the Beautiful for like 30 years. And I had given him a 25% stake in my company. And we got to a point of just really not working well together and falling out. And at the same time, I had all of these deals that were pending, and I was working with major banks and hedge funds and trusts and investors and locking all this stuff together. And his wife files for divorce, and I see it come out on like TMZ and all this stuff, and I get locked in it, because he owns 25% of my company, Community Property Rights. I'm in California. She owns 12.5% of my company. And we're all represented by the same accountants, and people start splitting off, and there's just a whole war that's going on, and people are fighting over the rights. And my daughter had just been born on January 25th, 2013. He called me from Switzerland, January 28th of 2013, and telling me that he had put together $30 million and wanted to renegotiate all of our deals. And he sounded like he was intoxicated. And we just had a blowout of an argument. And I remember the next day he sends out an email with like 17 people copied, all the major agencies, our PR firms, our lawyers, basically trying to politically pull everyone away from me, and saying that, we're separating. He was trying to say it was his, and this is what he did. He was very political and whatever. And of course that didn't work because I had formed relationships with all these other people. They trusted me. They knew that I was the guy who was really, delivering. But nevertheless, I got stuck in it, and our financing ended up collapsing, and I had millions in, and I had every major film every major film basically in Hollywood coming through my company. I had access to almost every major project.
Mm.
And yeah, so I was, it collapsed, and I had my daughter been born, and I think shortly after we were expecting my son, and I was, at that time I was spending anywhere from minimum $25,000 to $75,000 a month, just living and getting operations done, but I was burning a lot of cash at that time. And, I don't quit. It was my biggest problem. I don't quit. I think the only thing that was unique, I remember my mother also would definitely attest to this, is I probably expected, I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to get married probably 4 or 5 times and have kids with a lot of different people, not because I want to, but because no one is going to be able to handle the swings that I'm handling every day. Because it's not comfortable at all. When my daughter was born, and I remember holding her, and I remember as a father realizing that I was going to be the first man introduction to a male in her life. That is when I said, I'd spent about 7, 8, 9 years at that time, mostly, negotiating every day or litigating every day with very good lawyers, very high level. And I was like, I need to take these skills and I need to become a lawyer. But I had to go to law school. I had to finish my college degree. Got a master's and all this other stuff. But I basically forwent income for 3 years and took out law school loans and take on hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra debt, and then rebuilt everything. And I thought I had peaked. And then, after I passed the bar, within about 4 or 5 months, I ended up originating, the main case against Steve Wynn, in the wake sort of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, and just started building everything from there. So, there's so many different details and so many different things, but yeah, I think that's probably the answer to your question, the long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Leave Nothing to Chance. If you want to know more about what it takes to succeed in the network marketing space, join us again next week for another amazing episode. For additional resources and to connect with John Solleder, visit leavingnothingtochance.com. Don't forget to leave a review, and we'll see you next time.